What is up, YouTube? Code Different, back here again today. Today I'm going to be talking about how to be a better programmer. I'm recording this video actually 3 months since my last recording. I haven't had much time at all to work on my programming language, my compiler Blink, which was the subject of my last video. And it's hard to do an interesting programming video regularly because I have to think of what I want to program and then do it and then record it and edit the video. I've always wanted to do a talking video like this. I've recorded some and I delete the recordings so they think they're horrible. But this one I think is actually going to be interesting and hopefully helpful. Another reason that I don't like to do them is because I have to write a script, which is annoying. But if I don't, I'll be rambling, which is what I'm doing right now. And I don't know what to put on the screen, right? Am I going to be one of those finance YouTube channels that puts Modern Warfare 2 gameplay on the screen? I don't know. I'll figure that out, I guess, in like an hour or two. This video is going to be a talking video, how to be a better programmer. And it's about the 4 things that I think made me a better programmer. Curiosity, agency, discipline, and creativity. Now, when I first started learning how to program, I was actually quite bad at it, in my opinion. Or at least I didn't have the natural affinity towards it that I felt other people that I saw in my classes had. But after 6 years, I think I've become fairly competent, as evidenced by some of the projects on my channel, specifically Blink. And I've had to learn how to carve out this path on my own. A lot of trial and error. I started learning programming my senior year of high school, just over 6 years ago at the time of this recording, maybe like 7 years ago. And I struggled to understand how for loops worked, if you can believe that. But one weekend I spent hours doing these little exercises, printing out different Christmas trees using different nested loops. And after that I figured out how for loops worked, I figured out how while loops worked, and I felt euphoric. Everybody knows that feeling. I still feel today, we all still feel today, it never really leaves you when you figure out something in a program and you feel like the skies have cleared, right? And that you're finally able to see how a program works correctly. But I have to say, even back then when I was running Java code in some online IDE, I was curious about how any of what I was typing worked, right? Like, I would type public static void main or system.out.println, and I wondered, okay, how is any of this producing any sort of meaningful result? I was curious how for loops and if statements could be used to create a video game, like Skyrim, specifically. And I didn't even know what a compiler was, what an operating system was. I didn't even know what I didn't even know. But it's important that I knew that. I knew that there were things I didn't know about. It's like that quote from Isaac Newton, not to say that I am like Isaac Newton, but what we know is a drop and what we don't is the ocean. This curiosity is something that not everybody has, and that's totally fine. Not everybody in CS is curious about it. They might just be doing it for their job. They want to get a job at it, and that's fine. Not everybody is going to be an exceptional programmer, and I'm not saying I am, but I am trying to be one. And not to sound pretentious or harsh, most people are going to just end up being regular, mediocre programmers, and that's fine. That's just the reality of the world. But if you want to become a better programmer, you need to be curious about something having to do with computers. Find some niche to fill. Or rather, find a niche that can actually fill you. In that, I mean, find something which interests you so much you don't mind spending your free time learning more about it. Some people are really into machine learning, others are really into web development. You may be able to tell. My main area of interest is programming languages and compilers. For me, there's nothing else in CS, and I've done machine learning, web development, etc. There's nothing else in CS that has as many layers that interest me as programming languages. I mean, we have parsing, type theory, type checking, optimizations, assembly production, memory management, and those are really just compiler things, right? Well, parsing and type checking are interpreter level things and also optimizations, but then we can get into interpreters and like garbage collection and all that stuff. And I can make 100 interpreters and 100 compilers and I would still have something I want to add or change or improve or learn more about. That's how deep this field goes. I used to be really interested in operating systems, and I spent a summer building my own. I promise this story does end soon. I didn't get far, but I did manage to write a bootloader and a process scheduler using some ARM assembly and some C code. I did a lot of reading on this topic, though, and over that summer of OS fervor, I learned so much that 4 years later, I still remember the things that I learned, and these things help me in programming today. Things like virtual memory management, page faults, cache locality, CPU architecture, disk management systems. A lot of this I did learn in school, but it was my curiosity on this topic which made me remember what I learned past, the final exam, made me pay close attention to what was being taught, but also made me do research outside of class. Like over that summer, I didn't have to do any of this to learn even more. Which brings me to my next point, agency. There needs to be something driving you on improving your programming skills, and I think it has to be like some sort of wholly intrinsic motivation. You need to do this for yourself, where the performer and the judge and the audience are all just you. And you need to build some projects to become a better programmer. That's the agency I'm talking about. You need to have yourself start something new. And I want to give a tip on working on personal projects. It can be daunting to start any project, from your first tic-tac-toe project to a fully fleshed out programming language. And I think people fall into two categories: diving right into the project, or deliberating on how to start for way too long. And both kinds of people end up having the progress stalled. Either you sit there at your laptop thinking about how to start, thinking about how everything's going to work for way too long, or you dive right in and a couple of days later you find yourself middle of the ocean, Point Nemo, no way to get back to land, and you're lost, and you might have to scrap the whole thing and start over, just because of some critical design flaw that you may have made earlier in the process. I'm not saying this is going to happen with a tic-tac-toe project, but it is very likely to happen on any sort of meaningfully complex project. And Leslie Lamport actually has a really good talk on this, which I'll link in the description. Leslie Lamport is mostly known for his work in distributed systems, concurrency, and the development of LaTeX. I haven't watched this talk in 5 years, but I always reference it because it helped me so much. It's about thinking before we code. When you're about to start a project, what I do is I actually handwrite bullet points on what needs to be done, any sort of pitfalls or problems I already see arising, and just make an outline of how the program is going to work. Eventually you get to the point where you might be doing that for every project, right? Even easy ones. And eventually you get to the point where you don't need to do it for easy ones. But when you get to an actually complex project, you'll have built up those skills of outlining and thinking before you code, such that you're able to tackle difficult projects potentially on one of your first few tries. You don't have to scrap and restart too often, hopefully, because you've already thought of stuff. But the thing is, I was very guilty of the second point I brought up before, deliberating on how to start for way too long. It does get to a point where you may be thinking too much about how you're going to write this program, and you really do just need to start eventually. So you need the agency to start a project, execute every action needed to finish it, and also the discipline to never give up, no matter how hard it gets. That's actually just a life quote, I suppose. Not really about programming, but by the time you're done with that, you will have learned so much that you are not the same programmer that you were when you began. I'm not the same programmer I was before I began Blink, before I began my OS projects, before I began my web development projects. Each project has fundamentally changed the way I program, the way I think about programs, right? But part of doing projects depends on a level of creativity, right? With programming, with CS in general, we are developing a very specific set of skills while programming or doing program-adjacent things like mathematics. This is a set of purely logical skills. They can still be abstract, but they are still logical skills. But we also need to grow in a creative way to become the best programmer we can be. I do believe that there is some balance that is needed. Part of it also depends on spending time away from your computer. As we all know, moments of inspiration occur to us when we are away from what we're working on. we've all had that moment. I think about this all the time. I used to wake up middle of the night and just suddenly know how to fix a problem in a program, some kind of bug. And I've literally done this where I wake up, it's 2 or 3 in the morning, and I run over to my laptop to fix a bug. Maybe it's like an off by 1 hour and I can do the change in 5 minutes, or maybe it's a whole different way of approaching some system in a more complex project, and I write down the notes very quickly before I go back to sleep. And then the next day I implement it and it's finally working, right? We all know this. You do need time away from programming to speed up these insights. Kind of like how Vegeta was farming Zenkai boosts on Namek. But not all time away is created equally, though. Too much idle time, in my opinion, is detrimental to learning. When I say time away from your computer, I don't mean spend it watching TV or slop on Instagram and TikTok, which all actively fry your brain, by the way, and you should get off of them if you really want to lock in on upgrading your programming ability. I mean, spend it learning and reading and drawing and exercising, painting, creating. Here's what I do, which I think has led me to become a better programmer because it has enhanced my creative side of my brain and also just given me time away from the computer. One, I like to read. I read mostly fiction novels, some philosophy. You have to read something that gets your mind working and imagining the world you're reading about. It can be philosophy, like I said, fiction, nonfiction, anything that gets your mind working, imagining, envisioning another world. Something visual, right? That's why I don't really think self-help books are very suitable for this task. Now, to the extent that self-help and some philosophy does overlap, but the purely self-help books like Atomic Habits and stuff like that, I don't think count for what I'm going for here. I don't think they count as novels, actually, now that I think about it. So, that's a topic on its own. Another thing that I do is exercise. Exercise most days out of the week. I think it's common knowledge by now that exercise helps your brain. I know 8 years ago, if you said this, people would say, that's bro science, you don't know what you're talking about. But I feel like now, because of Instagram and being online, and I think this all really started during COVID in 2020, people seem to understand now that exercise does help your brain. And my third thing that I do is my creative outlet. I like to draw sometimes. I don't do it too often anymore. My most creative hobby right now is, I guess, making these YouTube videos. I have to do the edits, and right now I'm writing scripts. Writing is itself creative. But these creative abstract hobbies do balance our mind and our skills when you consider the opposite side of the spectrum is what we do all day, every day with programming. The best programmers I know all have some kind of actual hobby outside of programming. Don't get me wrong, programming is still their main passion. It's still my main passion, but their free time is spent on other things. One of my friends, as cliche as it may be, does like rock climbing, and another one just likes building things, like little electronic gadgets. He's like a tinkerer, in a way. But these are the 4 things I have done that have made me go from a total beginner to, I would say, an intermediate to advanced programmer. Of course, other things include reading about system design and that sort of thing, but that's sort of what comes after you reach a level of competency, right? Like a beginner's not going to pick up a system design book and truly understand what's being said, in my opinion. This video is focused more on people who are trying to improve their ability to write code and think about programs to begin with. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video or agreed with what I said, please leave a like and consider subscribing. If you have anything else to add, please add a comment. I'd love to learn more ways to improve. And yeah, let me know what you think about these talking videos. I may do more. They are easier to make than the programming ones. And I think maybe they are more helpful too, to a wider audience at least. So yeah, let me know. Goodbye.